this tank, as you see it configured here at Battlefield, this is most reminiscent of the scheme that the US took these tanks to the Lebanese conflict in 1982. That's kind of essentially what's bloody represented here. So this is the A1. But a lot of the same features that carry over would be QD interchangeable headlights. If you lose one of these, you just unscrew the coupler, pop it out, pop another one in. There's no need to do connectors and pins and all that other stupid bullshit. It's a quick change. The driver even carried spares inside with him. We do have our rubber trackpad, being as that's the new NATO standard post-war. But a big change over from this, from earlier M48, was the M48 had that reminiscent of the Shermans and the Pershings in World War II, the chevron style trackpad. They created an issue because those rubber trackpads were kind of vulcanized onto a frame, and once they wore out, they were toast. They had to essentially change those out, send them back to the factory, be re-vulcanized. This was the first iteration of the ability to actually change individual trackpads at unit level without having to waste all the US taxpayer dollars changing out the rubber trackpad. The light, so everybody asks, what's that on top of there? It is exactly what it looks like. It's a giant spotlight. But you got to remember, at the time when this tank sort of hit the battlefield, night vision existed, but it was still kind of limited. And so much so that additions of light might be required to help amplify that night vision, but it also has the white light function. So they had kind of an IR filter that would go over this, and that really only works if you have night vision. You can use your IR to amplify its quality, but if the enemy has a night vision capability too, they're just going to see that IR light from everywhere. The white light itself does serve a function. So everybody would assume normally that you turn on that white light, you're pretty much done. Not necessarily always true. If this tank is more, let's say, in defense, it's in charge of guarding a fire base or repelling a massive attack from big airfields, big fire bases, which happened in Vietnam, the white light comes very handy in a defense situation. So picture you're on the border of a massive base, the enemy comes in, they get bumped, flares are going off everywhere, a loom's coming in. A fucking white light is going to be more of an aid to you than give away your position. They already know where you are, they're hitting the place. So it's really more used for defensive tactics, but ultimately it was dropped when we moved forward onto the Abrams, because the night fighting capabilities and night fighting equipment just became more advanced, that the white light really wasn't required. So here I am now inside the loader's position, and as you can see, I am standing completely, and I am 5'11". There are not many tanks you can stand in. So, you know, sort of pre-Cold War era tanks that you can straight stand up in like this. So there is a lot of room in the turret, but, you know, also that creates a larger target. So much of a muchness, really. But the loader's job is very self-explanatory. Remembering all the Western tanks, the loader is on the left. All the Soviet design tanks, the loader is on the right. So not much to it. Again, I love the simplicity of the M60. It's so good. The loader had access to an M16 rifle, which would have been kept here. The only thing that is missing in the tank is our rangefinder. That would have been a big, bulky piece of equipment that ran all the way across the top of the turret. We don't have one of those, but short of that, this tank is very complete. He had ammunition all over the place. So in addition to the 2 ammo racks either side of the driver, that probably would have been his reserve ammunition. He had ready rack ammo on the floor at his feet, and then behind him he had another supply of ammo right here. So there is a lot of room for ammunition in the tank. The only thing being is, as it's such a large case, he had to stay on top of his empty shell storage and restow that, or it accumulates on the floor of the tank and creates a problem. So this brings up a good point right now to discuss a bit of Western versus Eastern mindset when it comes to tank doctrine. Post-World War II, Russia conducted a large study of where all of its tanks were destroyed, and it was essentially discovered that the majority of hits on a T-34 during World War II was a hit in the turret. And of that large proportion of hits to the turret, additionally, it wasn't necessarily always incoming ordnance that destroyed the crew. It was the fact that that incoming ordnance would detonate the ammo inside the turret. So right after World War II, the Russian way of thinking was to get the ammunition out of the turret and down on the floor, underneath the turret or in front of either side of the driver. And with the earlier stuff like the T-55, T-62 platform, he had a handful of rounds with him in the turret, but the majority of the ammunition was kept on the hull. That does another thing for you. What that does is that lowers the weight of the tank out of the turret and it centralizes it in the hull. And that creates for a much smoother, easier ride on the suspension. That's not for crew comfort. That is so the stabilization of the gun system has to work far less than it would in a Western tank with all that weight up in the turret with a top-heavy tank. However, the massive disadvantage of that is if the turret is not traversed at the 12 o'clock position, the loader has very limited access to the ammunition that he needs to conduct a firefight or whatever fire control orders the crew commander is giving him. If he uses that small reserve of ammo in the turret has to be orientated back to the 12 o'clock position and he has to break his position and get down to get ammunition back. So they're going to be relying very heavily on the driver instinctive training of whenever you get into a contact, the driver knows that he has to orientate the hull towards the contact for two reasons. The first reason is the tank presents its thickest form of armor to the fight, but it also allows that loader to know where or be able to access his ammunition better. So the Western way of loading was, if we have ammunition inside the turret, a human operator loader has far better access and a higher rate of fire with the rounds right behind the gun. And that's kind of the way of thinking even today with the US Western-based tank design. But one thing to consider is the Russians came up with their auto-loading tank system, and that basically negated the whole need for the loader to access that ammunition that was not positioned correctly. Additionally, with tanks like T-72 and T-90, it eliminated the entire crew member needed to be the loader. So in the turret of a 72, you have your gunner and your crew commander, that's it. The need essentially dictated the desire to create that change and brought the autoloader about. The huge advantage the autoloader has is that the rate of fire doesn't change. It's the same on the move or stationary. But a human operator on the move with the tank traversing heavy terrain, he's got to hold on and maintain balance whilst also conducting his reload drill. So the challenges really come into their own in that situation. I would say personally, one system is not better or worse. With the autoloader comes complexities, you know, more moving parts, more mechanical, more maintenance, more money, etc., etc. But they've eliminated an entire crew member from the tank having that autoloading system. So let's create a shitstorm in the comments and comment below what you think the best way of thinking tank doctrine is loading by hand out of the turret or having that auto-loading system. Let the games begin. So the M60 was equipped with that infamous L7-105 gun, and that gun was cutting edge when it came onto the battlefield. It created immense problems for the Russians, and it caused the Russians to essentially reevaluate the entire tank thinking doctrine. And it forced, this gun forced Russia to conceive entire new tanks because of this. This gun was also so popular that not only was it US tanks carrying the gun, it was also British tanks, German tanks, everybody ran with the L7 gun. But the L7 gun design in itself was different. They're not all the same. While your barrel and your caliber is the same, the breech mechanism and the carriage of the guns were all unique to whichever tank they came out of. So this setup here is unique to M60. I have also worked with Leopard guns, and I will say This gun recoil system is the simplest, easiest to maintain, and most reliable gun carriage system that I've come across. There are no nitrogen-filled cylinders. You don't have to worry about maintaining any form of nitrogen. Essentially, in front of the breech ring in this chamber back here, it's nothing but a giant spring, a massive spring that when the gun fires, the spring compresses, and when the gun releases, the spring relaxes and sends it back into battery. It does not get simpler than that. The only other thing we have to assist in that is what's called, it's just an oil-filled replenisher. So on recoil, the gun sucks fluid out of this reservoir into the chamber. And then when the gun comes back into battery, it uses this oil as like a shock absorber system. So the gun doesn't slam back into battery every time. It is probably between everything I've worked on, all of the Russian tanks, the Sherman, this is the simplest gun and most reliable gun system that I've come across. The loader is not only responsible for loading the main gun, he's also responsible for manning the coax machine gun. And earlier on in the M60s, that would have been an M60 Charlie model, I believe. But with modern upgrades in the US Army moving to the 240, it's now a 240 Charlie mount. Charlie model simply means it's set up for the tank package, meaning it's not there to be manned by an infantry soldier. There'd be no buttstock, there'd be no pistol grip. It's electronically fired and so on and so forth. So the gun is extremely easy to operate. It's a drop breech block. So I'm not a tanker by trade, so this can probably be achieved a little faster, but very simple, very reliable. Once the gun is loaded, he has a loaded safety switch. He'll engage it to fire. When this happens, the loader knows instinctively he has to clear the gun with his entire body for that recoil stroke. So this is the loader's method of engaging the safety and the fire on the gun. His ammunition behind him, very straightforward. I'm going to talk about a very interesting fact on the gun right now. So right here I have the firing pin out of the L7 gun on the M60. And why this is unique is most people know about firearms and cannons the way that they initiate is a percussion primer. A firing pin slams into the primer and it sets the gun off. The M60 kind of set the precedence for a lot more of these modern tanks to be electronically fired. So what does that actually mean? When the breech is closed, the firing pin automatically rests on the base of the round, and it sits in place there, and an electrical current is sent through the firing pin into the primer, and the primer is electronically fired. That creates for a safer and a much more reliable initiating system than the old percussion ways. So it decreases the amount of dud primers you may have, and it's definitely safer for handling and usage as well. So, but you'll notice the insulation on the firing pin. There's various plastic parts on it. That is there so at any point the current has to flow through the firing pin into the base of the round. If at some point the firing pin is grounding out and the current goes into the tank, you don't have a firing projectile. The M60 and then some of the later M48A3s had the introduction of different stowage bins all around the tank, and that allowed the tank crew to carry more personal items, more sleeping gear, more rations, water, and so on. And then I guess it was really up to individual unit level as to what was stored in these, but they also have like gun cleaning equipment, so all your cleaning staves to clean out your gun or clear a stuck round, if you will. Cleaning equipment, and then track equipment, all your tools and so on required to break track, spare track parts are all stored in the storage bins around the tank. Then we're looking at those top-loading armor boxes again. Once again, the M48s from Vietnam, they would swing out and change the air filter. These became more heavy-duty, more armored. So the post-Vietnam M60 ones unbolt, lift up, and then the air filters come out that way. You can see here at Battlefield, we kind of added a little bit more onto the tank to give it an individual crew touch. A lot of this sort of extra bullshit you see on the sides really depended on the time, the unit, how much flexibility tank crews had to sort of tweak the tank to suit their needs a little better. And that really is good practice because it encourages more initiative within the units, and that's where you really see innovation happen. And sometimes situations where things have been added onto a tank in field actually carry over to full-on factory floor production quality, and that does come out occasionally. Not much going on the back other than your marker and indicator lights, toe pintle, and then this is access to your rear transmission. So for basic servicing, these doors will swing out. You'll pull off a cover, and then the crews have access to the rear of the transmission where they conduct different linkage adjustments. And you also bleed your brakes and service your brakes from here, where you can pull this panel and run it in through there as well. Time for the big reveal, the big plot twist, the big weight. All M60s, other than your earliest prototypes, were M48s. Let me say that one more time. All M60s were M48s. That is why today in the US, M48s are not very common. There's not many of them in museums in private hands. The ones that are just happen to miss that period of upgrade. But the lower hull of this thing is an M48 hull. It went back to factory level, and there's even footage out there and photos of the guys in the Detroit tank plant cutting these things up and turning them into M60s. So how did they achieve that? Well, when you go back to early M48, we already talked about the front. They just cut that off and they just welded on those steel plates. And then for the arse end of the fucking thing, it was just a flat, like a flat grill, and then the engine deck was a straight wall piece of armor that went straight down with no breathing ports in here. Because that early gasoline AVDS was a piece of shit, even with full fuel and added fuel, the maximum range of the tank wasn't much more than 90 miles. So incredibly ineffective and not very efficient. When Continental, who designed that engine, took it back in and did their diesel upgrade, they made an incredible engine, and that's what you see in here. Again, there's another video for the in-depth of that engine, but they had to modify the back deck of the tank. So they essentially cut the top of the M48 back deck off and just added a small section that has bigger recesses on it for your air intakes. And then they cut the back deck off right above those access ports to have the armored swing out doors. So you can still look at this thing right now and see those marks where it was M48, and they took to it with the gas axe, cut it off, and re-welded on the extra bits you needed. This is also prevalent when you look at M48A3, the US main battle tank in Vietnam. The A3s were just A1s and A2s with that gasoline engine, and they changed it to a diesel. So 48 A3s had this exact same back deck on the back of it. So that explains why there's really not many M48s left out there privately or even in the museum industry. So now I'm in the gunner's position. I'm right in front of the crew commander, and pretty self-explanatory. My entire job in this spot is to man the gun. He would have had a periscope in this location that would have had night vision, clear glass eye optic, and potentially thermal, depending on the various upgrades that the tank had. And then he also has a tank telescopic sight, which we do have in place. We use this one all the time. Important to note with tank optics is if you only have the tank telescope, it's a very zoomed in, very pinpoint optic. And if the gunner did not have a periscope and all he had to rely on was viewing through the telescope, he would essentially get tunnel vision very, very bad. The idea of the periscope is he does the majority of his viewing through the periscope. He sees where we're driving, he acquires targets, and so on and so forth. And he can get an idea of where the enemy is, a general picture through the periscope. And when the periscope also has crosshairs in there too. When the periscope gets its crosshairs onto the target, at that point he can transition from the periscope to the telescope, and that's where his fine adjustments are done to take his shot. So the gunner essentially has two forms to control the turret. First and foremost, he would have a hydraulic traverse and elevate, which we're going to demonstrate shortly. But he also has a manual override of traverse and then elevation and depression of the gun. So why that's important, first and foremost, if we're in battle and we take a hit to where the tank loses hydraulic or electric power, he can still manually traverse the gun and get the gun onto a target. Being as that we have glass eye optics, we don't need the power of the tank to shoot that. Now, we talked about how the round is fired electrically. So normally, using the gunner's quadrant, we send vehicle power through the tank into the round to shoot it off. But what happens if the tank loses power? Well, just like the old dynamite blasters back in the day that they push on the plunger and it generates power, the gunner has a manual override. So the power of the tank can be completely off. And this is a little hand generator. So when he turns this, it produces enough voltage to fire that round. So this normally lives next to the gunner. And in the event that he has a misfire or power in the tank, he can twist this and still fire off the round. I'll now demonstrate the traverse system. It's a oil hydraulic system. So we have a massive electrical motor that drives a hydraulic pump. And then when we traverse, we're simply opening a valve left or right or up and down to elevate our gun. We also have what's called a recuperator. This giant cylinder here, that's very crucial to the operation of the traverse and the turret. You'll also see our gauge there. What that does is it's a nitrogen-filled cylinder, and we use nitrogen for one very important reason, is that it's an inert gas. It's not flammable, it's not combustible, and it doesn't change its pressure according to the temperature outside. Where we would use CO2 or oxygen, in addition to the flammable issues that might be there, CO2 and oxygen changes its pressure according to the temperature that you're at. So what that does is when we're running in hydraulics, one important thing to remember with hydraulic engineering is every reaction has an opposite reaction, right? Newton's law, I think. We have to quote that. If you're traversing in one direction, you've got that massive amount of flow coming out of the pump, forcing the turret in that direction. If we rapidly shut that off, all that force is going to go back the other way. And without the recuperator, what that's going to do is that's going to send one of your components of your motor or through your pump flying out the side of the block, damaging lines and causing injury to the crew. The recuperator is there to negate that. So it's a nitrogen-filled cylinder. So there's a piston in here. On one side of the piston, you have all the oil that is being transferred through the pump. When you rapidly stop that pump, all that energy from the hydraulic system running is pushed into the cylinder here, and the nitrogen acts like a cushion, and it cushions that shock. So any hydraulic system that exists out there, even those in maybe like an excavator or a dozer and so on, has that recuperator system. They just work differently. So making sure that that is topped up with nitrogen is one of the responsibilities of the crew, possibly the gunner. And when it doesn't have air in it, it'll begin to scream. So we're a little low on air, so you will hear the system screaming. All that is it building its pressure up. So I'm going to demonstrate traverse now. As a safety mechanism, unless he squeezes the grips at the back here, the tank turret will not traverse. He has to engage these for it to traverse. So the azimuth indicator is what this is called, and this is also crucial to the gunner's situational awareness. So if I'm not peering through the tank gunner's periscope or it's dark outside, I have no idea what the orientation of the turret is to the hull. And why that's important is if I'm traversed off hard to the 3 o'clock and we're in close country, the driver can hit the barrel with trees and so on and so forth and cause damage to the tank. The other reason that's there is when the crew commander gives me as the gunner a target indication, he might say traverse 90 degrees left, whatever. I use this azimuth indicator that tells me where the turret is orientated according to the hull of the tank. This is an important control of the gunner, so he can relate to the crew commander's target indications. So if the crew commander tells him to depress X amount of degrees, he's working off a bubble level that sits inside here. And say the crew commander says to elevate 10 degrees, he would rotate his knob to the degree required, and then he'd elevate or depress the gun until his level here appeared again. So you can kind of get the idea of how that works. It also has a backlight, so he can see this in the dark as well. One of the only other critical parts of the gunner's position would be the gun stabilization. Down and dirty, for those who don't know, stabilization is while the tank is moving, the gunner can aim at a target, and with the stab on, it'll keep the gun level on the target while the tank is moving around. And that works by feeding or taking out hydraulic fluid from that elevation system. But he would engage the power and the stabilization, and then these dials here for traverse and elevation actually increase or decrease the sensitivity of the stabilization system. It's important to note when talking about the M60s is that there is also a tank known as the M60-A1, which is what was essentially an Israeli modification. And they took the M48 from its root, and they went through all of the upgrades, even into the turret, and they changed the gun into the turret to the L7 105mm. So more or less, M48A1, except for the cast shape of the turret and the cast front, M48A1 is basically M60. However, they didn't have the numbers or the foundries at the time, so they made use of what they had, and that's what pushed their ultimate upgrade for the M48 all the way to A5, although they also received M60s, which was called the Magak series of tank. So I'd lastly like to point out a lot of the information that we received for the M60 came from our buddy Chris Hughes. A lot of you might know him as Toadman. He is the go-to source for all things tank related, and those of you tank junkies out there that really need that strong hit, Toadman's Tank Pictures on Facebook is the place to be for that. He often comes out with a weekly dose at least of insane level of armor in depth, and Chris helped us out to really confirm some of the finer details for the M60 in this video. If you want to learn more about Chris, you can go back to some of our previous work, and we actually conducted an interview with Chris about what he does and his whole story. And you can also, if you enjoyed this video, you can jump onto Chris's social media page, Toadman Tank Photos, and get a closer look at armor really in detail. So check it out.